When you think of HOA disputes, you probably imagine petty arguments over lawn height or mailbox colors. But in our case, things took a terrifying turn. My wife wasn't just hassled, she was sued. By a power-hungry HOA Karen simply for exercising her rights and wearing a legally owned gun. What followed was a shocking battle of control, intimidation, and justice that spiraled far beyond anything we ever imagined. Part 1. The calm before the storm. When we first moved into our neighborhood, life felt almost idyllic. The houses were lined up neatly, each yard trimmed to perfection, sidewalks swept clean, and flower beds blooming in unison as if competing in some silent contest. It was the kind of community that looked beautiful on postcards, the picture of stability, security, and middle-class pride. My wife and I had worked hard for years to build the kind of life where we could finally afford a home in a quiet subdivision. For us, this neighborhood represented more than just property. It was supposed to be a safe place to grow, to breathe, to enjoy our lives together without the chaos of the city pressing down on us. At least, that's what we thought when we signed the papers. The Homeowners Association, or HOA, had been pitched to us as a safeguard for the community. They claimed to ensure that property values stayed high, the neighborhood looked clean, and no one could just move in and ruin the charm with an overgrown lawn or loud parties. On paper, it seemed reasonable enough. A small monthly fee, a set of rules, and in return, we got consistency. That's what the realtor told us anyway. We had no idea just how deeply the HOA board, or more specifically, one woman on it, believed in her self-appointed mission to police everyone's lives. At first, everything felt fine. My wife enjoyed the backyard, planting small vegetable patches and roses near the patio. I loved sitting on the porch with my morning coffee, waving at neighbors who strolled by. It was peaceful. The cul-de-sac kids rode bikes without fear, people barbecued on weekends, and everyone greeted each other with polite smiles. In those first few months, I thought we had stumbled into something rare, an actual community that lived up to its promises. But peace never lasts when control and power sit in the wrong hands. Her name was Karen. I don't mean Karen in the slangy internet sense. That just happened to be her actual name, though it seemed almost too fitting. She was the kind of person who had a sharp eye for anything that didn't match her view of perfection. Her lawn was always cut to exactly the same height, her hedges trimmed like they'd been measured with a ruler, her driveway spotless enough to eat off of. She loved rules, or rather she loved being the one to enforce them. She wasn't just a board member of the HOA, she was its self-declared sheriff, judge, and jury. The first time I noticed her, she was standing at the end of the street, clipboard in hand, jotting something down as she scanned the neighborhood like a hawk. She had this way of glaring over her glasses that made you feel like you committed a crime without even knowing what it was. She didn't wave like other neighbors. Instead, she nodded, pursed her lips, and went back to writing whatever notes filled her clipboard. At first, I dismissed it as quirky. Every neighborhood has someone who takes things too seriously. But soon, Karen's presence began to creep into the corners of our daily lives. My wife, Sarah, is a strong woman. She grew up in a military family, learned discipline, and carried herself with quiet confidence. She also carried something else, a legally owned firearm. She had her concealed carry permit and often wore her handgun in a holster at her side. It wasn't something she flaunted, nor was it something she used to intimidate. For her, it was about personal safety. She worked late hours some nights, and after years of being cautious in unpredictable places, she found comfort in knowing she could protect herself if the need ever arose. In our previous neighborhood, no one batted an eye. In fact, many people there were gun owners. It was part of the culture, responsible, law-abiding, unremarkable. But this new neighborhood was different. It was quieter, more manicured, and as we would come to learn, tightly controlled. The first time Karen noticed Sarah's holster, it was a warm Saturday afternoon. Sarah had been trimming the roses near the front yard while wearing her gardening gloves, jeans, and a tank top. Her holster sat on her hip, visible but unthreatening. Karen had been walking her tiny white dog past our house. She stopped in her tracks, eyes narrowing as she zeroed in on the holster. "Is that a gun?" Karen asked, her voice dripping with a mix of shock and disdain. Sarah, never one to be rattled easily, glanced up and nodded. "Yes, I'm licensed. Everything's perfectly legal." Karen pressed her lips together in that tight little line I'd come to know all too well. "This is a family neighborhood. Children live here. Don't you think it's inappropriate to be flashing weapons around?" Sarah calmly returned to clipping the roses. "It's not flashing. It's holstered, and it's my right." Karen gasped as if Sarah had just cursed in front of her. "We'll see what the board has to say about this," she snapped, before storming off down the sidewalk, her dog yipping at her heels. That was the moment the storm clouds began forming. Over the next few weeks, Karen began paying unusual attention to us. I'd catch her staring at our house from across the street, her phone raised like she was snapping photos. She loitered nearby whenever Sarah was outside, and whenever she walked by with her dog, her eyes inevitably flicked to Sarah's hip, her face tightening in disapproval. At the time, we didn't think much of it. Neighbors gossip. Some people are nosy. We didn't realize she was building a case. Then came the letters. At first, they were polite, printed notes slipped into our mailbox with the HOA logo at the top. They cited vague community concerns about public safety. Then they grew sharper, accusing Sarah of creating an unsafe environment by displaying a weapon in public view. My wife and I read them aloud at the dinner table, baffled. The rules of the HOA made no mention of firearms, none at all. There were pages about fence heights, pet restrictions, paint colors, and lawn care, but nothing about legal concealed carry or personal rights. "She can't be serious," I muttered, tossing one of the letters aside. Sarah gave a dry laugh. "Karen lives to be serious. This isn't about the HOA. This is about control." She was right. Karen began showing up at HOA meetings with new concerns every time, and though we didn't attend every meeting, word spread fast. Neighbors began asking us questions in hushed tones. "Hey, what's the deal with the gun thing? Karen says it's scaring kids." Others avoided eye contact altogether, clearly uncomfortable. We started noticing the subtle shift in how people waved, or didn't wave, when we passed by. Still, Sarah refused to be intimidated. "I'm not doing anything wrong," she told me one night as we sat on the porch, watching the streetlights flicker on. "If I give in to her, she'll just find something else to complain about. People like Karen feed off compliance." I admired her strength, but part of me couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that this was only the beginning. Karen wasn't just a busybody. She was determined, relentless, and armed with the authority of the HOA, a shield she used to hide her personal vendettas behind. And though we didn't yet realize it, her obsession was about to escalate in ways that would turn our peaceful home into a battleground. Karen's obsession with power. It is funny how quickly a person's personality can go from mildly irritating to completely unhinged once they get a taste of authority. If part one of our ordeal had been the setup, then part two was the escalation, the phase where Karen's obsession with controlling not just our lives, but the entire neighborhood, came into full, ugly bloom. At first, we thought the letters would stop. Sarah wasn't violating any HOA rules, and we figured once Karen realized she had no legal ground to stand on, she'd eventually move on to another target. Maybe she'd find someone with grass a half-inch too long or a trash can left on the curb for an extra day. That was how these busybodies worked, wasn't it? Always moving from one complaint to the next. But Karen wasn't like other busybodies. She didn't let go. She latched on like a pit bull, jaw locked, and refused to release her grip. The next sign of escalation came one morning when Sarah left for work. She always carried her bag over one shoulder, her holster in clear view on the other side. As she climbed into the car, she noticed Karen standing across the street, phone raised. At first, Sarah thought she was just snapping a photo of her perfectly trimmed roses, but when Karen turned slightly, angling the phone toward her, Sarah realized the truth. She was taking pictures of her, gun and all. "Excuse me, what are you doing?" Sarah called out across the driveway. Karen lowered the phone but didn't bother to hide her smug expression. "Documenting, for the safety of our neighborhood." Sarah clenched her jaw but didn't take the bait. She climbed into the car, muttering under her breath, "Unbelievable." When she told me later that evening, I could see the frustration bubbling just under the surface. "It's one thing to complain," Sarah said, pacing the living room, "but taking pictures of me? That's harassment." I nodded, feeling the same anger. She's building some kind of case. I'd bet money she's compiling a file for the HOA. And sure enough, a week later, that's exactly what she presented. The HOA meeting that month was packed. Normally, only a handful of residents showed up, but word had spread that Karen was planning to address a grave safety concern. Sarah and I decided to attend, not because we enjoyed the politics of it, but because we knew her accusations would be about us. And we weren't going to sit quietly while she spread lies. The meeting started with the usual droning about budgets, landscaping contracts, and community events. Then Karen raised her hand. Her voice carried across the room with theatrical importance. "I'd like to bring to everyone's attention a matter of urgent concern," she began. "One of our residents has been openly carrying a deadly weapon around our neighborhood. Children have seen it. Parents have complained to me directly. This is unacceptable for a family-friendly community." Every eye in the room turned toward us. I felt Sarah stiffen beside me. Karen pulled a stack of papers and photos from her bag. "I've documented multiple instances of this behavior. Here are photographs of her carrying the weapon in plain sight. Gardening, walking to her car, even at the mailbox. This is not just irresponsible, it's dangerous. What kind of message does this send to our children?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some neighbors looked concerned, others looked confused. A few avoided eye contact, clearly uncomfortable with being dragged into Karen's crusade. Sarah raised her hand calmly. "May I respond?" The board president nodded reluctantly. Sarah stood, her posture strong, her voice steady. "I am a licensed firearm owner. I have a concealed carry permit. Everything I do is within the boundaries of the law. I am not brandishing a weapon. I am not threatening anyone. And I am certainly not endangering children. This," she gestured toward Karen's stack of papers, "is harassment disguised as concern." Karen scoffed loudly. "You think your rights are more important than our safety? More important than the children's safety?" Sarah's eyes didn't waver. "My rights are protected by law. Your discomfort does not override the law." The room grew tense. Some nodded in agreement with Sarah, others whispered behind their hands, and the board members shifted uncomfortably. Finally, the president spoke. "We appreciate both perspectives, but since this is not specifically addressed in the HOA bylaws, we cannot take official action at this time." Karen's face turned red, her lips tightening until they almost disappeared. She wasn't used to being told no. From that day forward, she doubled down. Karen became the unofficial neighborhood spy. She was everywhere, walking her dog at odd hours, lingering near mailboxes, sitting in her car parked down the street. Neighbors joked nervously about Karen patrol, but behind closed doors, the laughter came with unease. Then came the letters again, only this time they weren't just slipped into our mailbox. They were delivered to every house in the neighborhood. Karen had typed up a formal letter warning residents about the threat Sarah posed by carrying a gun, and she distributed it like propaganda. Some people shrugged it off, but others took it to heart. Overnight, Sarah became the center of whispers and side-eyes. Mothers pulled their kids closer when we walked by. Conversations stopped abruptly when we entered a room. "She's turning people against me," Sarah said one night, her voice heavy with frustration. "She's trying to isolate us?" I replied. "Classic tactic. If she can't use the board, she'll use the court of public opinion." And it was working. The divide in the neighborhood grew sharper. A few supportive neighbors quietly assured us they didn't see anything wrong with Sarah's choices. One even admitted, "Honestly, I've got my own gun, but I'm not about to tell Karen that." But most people stayed silent, unwilling to cross her. Karen thrived in that silence, mistaking it for agreement. What disturbed me most wasn't the gossip, but Karen's persistence. It wasn't enough for her to complain once. She kept the pressure constant, always pushing, always escalating. At one point, she even approached Sarah directly while she was unloading groceries from the car. "Do you really think you're some kind of hero walking around armed like that?" Karen hissed, standing uncomfortably close. "You're scaring people. This isn't the Wild West. You don't belong here if you can't follow the rules." Sarah set the grocery bag down firmly and looked her in the eye. "The rules you're talking about don't exist. You don't get to invent them." Karen's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." It was more than just a threat. It was a promise. As weeks passed, Karen's obsession started to feel like a siege. We caught her taking photos of our house at night. She filed noise complaints against us, even though we weren't making noise. She reported our mailbox as improperly painted when it was the exact shade the HOA guidelines required. It became clear she wasn't just targeting Sarah's firearm, she was targeting us. Every day felt like living under surveillance. Sarah grew more withdrawn, tired of the constant scrutiny. But she refused to cave. "If I give in now," she told me, "she'll think she can control every aspect of my life. I won't hand her that victory." Karen, on the other hand, was just getting started. She had tasted the power of fear, of manipulation, and she wasn't going to let it go. And as we would soon learn, her next move would take things from harassment to outright legal warfare. It happened on a Tuesday morning. The knock on the door wasn't unusual, but the stern man standing there with a folder in his hand was. He wore a suit, his face impassive, his tone clipped. "Are you Mrs. Sarah Day?" he asked. "Yes," Sarah replied cautiously. He handed her the folder. "You've been served." With those 3 words, everything in our lives shifted. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, staring down at the thick packet of papers in her hands. For a moment, the world seemed silent. Then the sound of our neighbor's lawnmower roared in the distance, birds chirped in the trees, and the ordinary day continued, while our lives had just been turned upside down. "What is this?" she whispered, flipping through the first few pages. Her face paled as her eyes scanned the bold header, "Civil Complaint." I stepped forward, gently taking the packet from her trembling hands. My stomach dropped as I read the words out loud. "The Homeowners Association of Neighborhood Name, represented by Karen, plaintiff, versus Sarah, defendant." Karen had done it. She had actually sued my wife for wearing a legally owned gun. At first it felt absurd, like some kind of sick joke. The complaint alleged that Sarah's visible holstered firearm created a hostile and unsafe environment for residents, constituted public endangerment, and violated community standards. The document droned on for pages, peppered with legal jargon and citations, some relevant, many wildly stretched. But the heart of it was simple. Karen had convinced the HOA board to file a lawsuit against Sarah in an attempt to force her to stop carrying altogether. I looked up from the papers, stunned. This is insane. She can't do this. Sarah's jaw tightened. "Oh, she can. That's the problem. She's using the HOA's name to make it official." And she was right. Anyone can sue anyone for almost anything. Winning, however, was another matter. But the fact that we'd even have to defend ourselves in court was outrageous. That night, our living room turned into a war room. Papers spread across the coffee table, highlighters scattered everywhere. Sarah sat hunched forward, reading every line like her life depended on it. And in some ways, it did. Because the lawsuit wasn't just about the gun. It was about our reputation, our finances, our peace of mind. If Karen succeeded, it would set a precedent. She'd have the power to dictate how we lived in our own home. "I won't let her win," Sarah said firmly, slamming the folder shut. "If she wants a fight, she's got one." But the fight wasn't just in court. It was in the neighborhood, too. Word spread fast. By the next day, people were whispering in their driveways, lingering in small groups near mailboxes. Some gave us sympathetic looks, others avoided eye contact altogether. A few even sided openly with Karen. "She's just trying to keep the neighborhood safe," one woman muttered as we passed. "Why does she need to wear it out in the open anyway?" another man asked his friend, not quietly enough. The gossip stung. But what hurt more were the neighbors who had once been friendly, now keeping their distance. The lawsuit had painted us as pariahs, dangerous outsiders in our own community. And Karen? She thrived on it. She strutted around the cul-de-sac like a queen who had just won a great battle. Clipboard in hand, she chatted with neighbors, dropping smug comments loud enough for us to hear. Well, when people can't follow the rules, sometimes legal action is the only way. Or, "I just want what's best for the children. Someone has to protect them." It made my blood boil. The stress began to creep into our lives in ways we hadn't expected. Sarah, usually so composed, started losing sleep. She lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. "What if the judge sides with her?" she whispered one night. "What if they make me stop carrying? What if it sets a precedent and we lose more than that?" I reached over and held her hand. "You're not alone in this. We'll fight it together." But even as I said it, a knot of worry twisted in my stomach. We began searching for lawyers the very next day. Most dismissed the case as frivolous but still expensive to fight. Legal defense wasn't cheap, and Karen knew it. That was part of her strategy, bleed us dry with court costs even if she couldn't win outright. Finally, we found one willing to take the case seriously, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney named Ms. Delgado. She flipped through the complaint with a smirk. "This is weak," she said flatly, "but don't underestimate it. People like her often win by persistence, not by merit. She's counting on you folding under the pressure." Sarah leaned forward. "I don't fold." Delgado smiled slightly. "Good, then let's show her that." Meanwhile, Karen ramped up her campaign. Not content with just the lawsuit, she used the pending case as fuel to further isolate us. She organized a so-called safety meeting for parents in the neighborhood, where she painted Sarah as a reckless vigilante. She sent out mass emails through the HOA listserv, dripping with loaded language. A resident openly displaying dangerous weapons. A threat to community peace. Families should feel safe in their own streets. Every time one of those emails popped up in our inbox, Sarah's hands shook with fury. "She's defaming me," she snapped, "spreading lies to make me look like some unhinged maniac." And the worst part? Some people believed her. We noticed fewer invitations to neighborhood gatherings. Kids who used to wave at Sarah now clung to their parents' sides. A man who once borrowed our ladder wouldn't even return a wave anymore. The isolation was suffocating. It was exactly what Karen wanted. The weeks leading up to the first court date were some of the hardest of our lives. Every day felt like walking on eggshells. Every time we opened the mailbox, we braced ourselves for another letter, another threat, another summons. One night, after a particularly long day, Sarah broke down in tears at the kitchen table. "I just wanted to live in peace," she whispered. "I never asked for any of this. I'm not a danger. I'm not the villain. Why can't they see that?" I wrapped my arms around her, feeling both protective and powerless. Because Karen doesn't care about truth. She cares about control. But she's not going to win. We'll make sure of it. Karen, however, strutted around the neighborhood like she had already won. She made comments about justice being served soon, about how the law was on her side. She even cornered Sarah once in the grocery store parking lot. "You should just settle now," Karen sneered. "Save yourself the embarrassment. Everyone knows what you're doing is wrong." Sarah looked her dead in the eye. "We'll see who's embarrassed when this is over." Karen's smug grin faltered for the briefest moment before she turned on her heel and stormed off. The night before the hearing, Sarah and I sat together, papers spread across the table once more. She looked tired, but her eyes burned with determination. "This isn't just about me anymore," she said. "This is about principle. If she wins, she'll think she can control anyone, and I won't let her do that." I nodded. "Then tomorrow we fight." And with that, we stepped into the storm. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the benches. The room buzzed with murmurs, neighbors whispering as they filed into the back rows. Sarah and I sat at the defendant's table, her hand gripping mine tightly. Her eyes, though tired, burned with determination. Across the aisle sat Karen, flanked by the HOA's lawyer, her smug smile never leaving her face. To Karen, this was her grand moment, the culmination of months of scheming, spying, and manipulating. She sat tall, chin lifted, as if she already owned the victory. She waved at a couple of neighbors who had come to watch, whispering something that made them chuckle. For her, this was a show. For us, it was survival. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. The case began with the HOA's lawyer laying out their claims. His voice was smooth, confident, but beneath it all, the argument was weak. "Your Honor," he began, pacing slowly, "this case is about protecting a community. It is about the safety of children, the peace of families, the preservation of harmony in a neighborhood. The defendant, Mrs. Sarah Das, has repeatedly carried a deadly weapon in plain view in violation of the standards and expectations of this homeowners association. While she may claim her actions are lawful, they are disruptive, frightening, and inconsistent with the values of this community." He gestured dramatically toward Sarah. "The presence of a firearm in open view has created fear among residents. Children have been exposed to it. Parents have voiced concern. And the plaintiff, Mrs. Karen Durfray, representing the association, has taken it upon herself to ensure this neighborhood remains safe. This case is not about rights. It is about responsibility." Karen beamed, nodding in exaggerated agreement. Then came Karen's testimony. She strutted to the witness stand as if it were a stage, swearing the oath with one hand raised high. "Mrs." The lawyer began. "Can you tell the court what you observed?" Karen sighed heavily, as though burdened by the weight of her duty. "Yes. I saw Sarah carrying a gun in public, multiple times, at the mailbox, in her yard, walking to her car. Children could see it. Parents told me they were terrified. One mother said her son cried because he thought a bad guy lived on our street. Her voice trembled just slightly, perfectly timed for effect. I feared for our safety. I feared for my dog when I walked past her house. I even worried that a disagreement could escalate into violence because she always had that weapon." The lawyer nodded solemnly. "And how did that make you feel, Mrs.?" "Bah." Karen placed a hand over her heart. "Unsafe. Unwelcome. Like our neighborhood wasn't the peaceful place it once was. I've lived there for 10 years, and I've never felt so afraid in my own community." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Some neighbors nodded sympathetically. Karen's eyes flicked toward us, triumphant. When it was Sarah's turn to testify, the shift in the room was palpable. She walked to the stand with steady steps, shoulders squared. She wasn't just defending herself. She was standing up to the bully who had tormented her for months. "Mrs. A. Our lawyer, Ms. Delgado, began. Do you own a firearm? Yes. Is it legally registered? Yes. Do you have a valid concealed carry permit? Yes, I do. Delgado nodded. Now, can you explain to the court why you carry it? Sarah's voice was clear, steady. I grew up in a military family. I was taught responsibility, discipline, and respect for firearms. I carry for personal protection. I've never threatened anyone, never brandished it, never used it in an unsafe manner. It stays holstered, always. Delgado stepped closer. Have you ever broken a law by carrying your firearm in the neighborhood? No, not once. Have you ever been cited, arrested, or charged for any incident related to your firearm? No. Delgado turned to the judge. No further questions. The simplicity of Sarah's testimony contrasted sharply with Karen's dramatics. Sarah wasn't emotional, manipulative, or theatrical. She was factual, calm, and confident. Then came the cross-examination. The HOA's lawyer smirked as he approached. Mrs. Do you understand that some people feel uncomfortable seeing a firearm? Yes, Sarah replied. And yet you continue to carry one in plain view, knowing it causes fear. Isn't that inconsiderate? Sarah looked him dead in the eye. Exercising my rights is not inconsiderate. I don't control other people's feelings. The lawyer's smirk faltered. So you admit you knew it frightened your neighbors? I admit Karen told me she was uncomfortable. That doesn't make it illegal. The room stirred with whispers. The lawyer pressed on, but every question he asked only made Sarah's calm logic stand out more. By the time she stepped down from the stand, I could see cracks forming in Karen's confidence. Then Delgado delivered the blow. She pulled out the HOA bylaws, flipping to the highlighted pages. Your Honor, I'd like to submit this into evidence. These are the official rules and regulations of the neighborhood HOA. She turned to the board president, who was also present. Can you confirm that these are accurate? Yes, he muttered reluctantly. Delgado snapped the binder shut. Nowhere in these rules does it say a resident cannot legally carry a firearm, not one word. My client has not broken a single rule. What has happened here is that Mrs. Karen Dobayo has decided to use her position on the board to push her personal agenda. Karen shifted uncomfortably. Delgado pressed on. Furthermore, we have evidence of harassment. She displayed printouts of Karen's mass emails, the letters she distributed, the photos she had secretly taken of Sarah. This is not concern. This is a campaign to humiliate and control my client. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Delgado's voice grew sharper. This lawsuit is not about safety. It is about power. It is about one woman's obsession with controlling her neighbors. And it is a gross misuse of the HOA's authority. Karen's face reddened, her smug smile gone. She whispered furiously to the lawyer, but the damage was done. The judge leaned forward, hands folded. I've heard enough. The room went silent. This case should never have come to this courtroom. The defendant has broken no laws, violated no rules, and acted responsibly at all times. The plaintiff's claims are based on fear, speculation, and personal bias, not fact. This lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. Karen's jaw dropped. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, I strongly caution the HOA against allowing personal disputes to escalate into legal harassment. This court is not a weapon for settling petty neighborhood feuds. Bang. The gavel fell. Case closed. The aftermath was almost as dramatic as the verdict. Karen stormed out of the courtroom, face twisted in rage. Neighbors whispered as she passed, no longer looking at her with admiration, but with unease. Her crusade had backfired spectacularly. Back in the neighborhood, the shift was immediate. Those who had kept their distance from us now came forward, apologizing quietly. Some admitted they'd felt pressured by Karen, too afraid to speak up. Others shook Sarah's hand, praising her for standing her ground. The HOA board, embarrassed by the debacle, distanced themselves from Karen. Within months, she was voted out. Her influence crumbled, her reputation tarnished. As for us, life slowly returned to normal. The whispers stopped. The isolation lifted. Sarah carried as she always had, quietly, responsibly, without incident. And though the scars of the ordeal lingered, we had won. Not just legally, but morally. One evening, sitting together on the porch, Sarah took a deep breath and said, "You know, I almost let her break me." I squeezed her hand. But she didn't. You stood your ground, and in the end, the truth won. She smiled softly, the first real smile in months. Yeah, the truth won. And with that, the storm that had consumed our lives finally passed, leaving us stronger, wiser, and free.